Hello, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to do a video contrasting extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. Kind of what are the similarities and what are the differences? And I want to do it in a way that has symmetry. Like I want to make it easy to understand. So you'll see what I mean in a moment. But I want there to be some symmetry. So extroverted thinking is predominantly used by the TJ types in the Myers-Briggs system, and it is also valued by the FP types as well, but kind of like secondarily valued. TI is valued by the TP types predominantly in the Myers-Briggs system, and kind of secondarily the FJ types. Okay, so I wanted to start with the words that were most commonly used in Carl Jung and Vanderhoop's and Myers-Briggs writing. So for extroverted thinking, the word that I saw over and over again in those quotes was the word system. And for TI, the word that I saw over and over again was the word principles. So I put the definition of these words here, and then I want to kind of show two applications of these words that I've seen a lot within TE and TI. So a system is a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. A principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. What I really like that this points out is kind of the synergistic nature within TE and TI. TI serves as the foundational principles for the system, and TE kind of creates the system and how can we coordinate these different things. So I really like how it kind of shows that they can work together as kind of like a yin-yang pairing. So I'll start with TE, and I want to list two applications of this word system. So the first type of system that I've seen is kind of logistics. When we talk about a coordinating mechanism, that could be logistics. So the detailed coordination of a complex operation involving many people, facilities, or supplies. So when we talk about things working together, it could literally be external things. And there were a lot of quotes about TE liking to govern, to command, to plan the programs, to schedule the things, set an aim, and reach it on schedule. And they like to be the authority. They like the one to make decisions. They like to command people, all these different quotes like that. So part of how this system shows up is in logistics. The other way that I think the system shows up is in synthesis. So not necessarily these interconnecting people, facilities, and supplies externally, but another way that this is kind of a thought system. So a combination of ideas to form a theory or system. So taking, Carl Jung said this and Vanderhoop said this, and we kind of synthesize all these ideas. Therefore, this is the system that we're working with. Over on the TI side, so we started with principles, and there's a couple application of this word principle. So the first one I think is logic, and I liked kind of this symmetry between TE and TI, so we have logistics versus logic. It's not a complete picture, but that is a portion of it. And the definition of logic is reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. So the word reasoning was used a lot, and principles was used a lot, and so I think we can kind of fairly say that I think it is a little bit more focused with internal logic. Like when we talk about logic and principles, it says for a chain of reasoning. So this chain of reasoning, I think it's pretty fair to say that logic kind of follows under this chain of reasoning or reason connected in that way. And then the second one is word theory showed up a lot, and I think that skews a little TI with an intuitive function, but the word theory showed up a lot. A supposition, especially one based on general principles, independent of the thing to be explained. But so then they'll take these principles, they'll take those general principles and make a theory. So you can kind of see this word principle showing up in the logic and theory definition. What I thought was interesting is TI will take their own principles and make a theory, whereas TE kind of synthesizes to make a theory. And I think that that's kind of a big difference. Do you make your theory based on your own principles, or do you make your theory based on synthesizing all of this information? Okay, so now I want to get into kind of the mirror and the symmetry like I was talking about. So TE's system, TI principles. So once again, kind of this external structure versus internal structure. Now that could include, but is not limited to, logistics and logic, creating this internal structure versus this internal structure. TE liking to command and govern, TI liking to critique truth and suss out what's true, what is false, based on their principles. So I like this there's some symmetry going on here. Extensity versus intensity. This was a direct quote from the text. I think it may have been Vanderhoop, but it said the introverted thinking values intensity while extroverted thinking values extensity. So extensity is kind of to extend or to construct something, and there were definitely quotes about TE doesn't like to destruct ideas or tear down ideas, but it always likes to advance and make progress and to construct something. What can we do with this knowledge? Whereas TI, there was a lot more about intensity. There were quotes about a complicated nature, scrupulousness, exactitude, and I really liked this quote, fine shades of meaning. Then we have decisive. Now, there were quotes definitely in both sections about being decisive, but they were different. So TE was externally decisive. It said they like to be the one in authority, they like to command others, they like to make decisions and make decisions quickly. So very externally decisive, whereas TI is a lot more internally decisive. So it said that like externally, especially with their friends, they can seem kind of like jovial, kind of go with the flow or whatever, but internally they are decisive, and that was kind of exemplified in stubbornness, hard to convince that they're mistaken when they feel that they're right. So I put kind of the two like negative words or kind of the issues. You can kind of see the difference here. So TE is more likely to become kind of tyrannical, too commanding, too interested in governing, bossy. These are my rules, so you got to play by them too, my way or the highway. That's kind of the tendency with TE. The tendency with TI is to have a little bit more hubris. This is what I think is right. There were quotes about the unfathomable stupidity of man. Others have got to bow down to its truth. Then this was a direct quote. Making use of knowledge, being TE, that was a direct quote. And then a critique of knowledge in general was a TI quote. So it's different. So both interested in knowledge, that's a comparison. Both decisive, it's a comparison. However, it's a difference of orientation. So knowledge and how can you use it externally? How can you make use of it? TE was knowledge which produces, thought which attains visible form, thought which produces, they said very determined, stake an objective and put a lot of systematic effort into achieving it on schedule. From afar, you notice their influential activities. So very ambitious, determined, success-oriented. I chose the word success because it was an S word, and I was trying to get some symmetry here with this success and skeptical. So making use of knowledge, a lot of times for success. Whereas TI is a critique of knowledge in general and kind of skeptical. So it's got this filter. Someone left a comment and they said that I feel like TE users are lacking an epistemological filter. And so that's something that I think it's like this skepticism, I think a good thing about TI is the skepticism. I think they both have their issues. I think like with TE, there were a lot of quotes about they can be too success oriented, kind of workaholic, this business mindset, forsake everything in the pursuit of this outcome. Their home life can suffer. So, there are definitely cons with being so success-oriented. And then with TI, there are cons with being so skeptical. I think sometimes too critical. Sometimes people, the Myers-Briggs quote was, say where you agree with someone before you say where you disagree. And then the reverse is kind of also true. I think, there are a lot of people that say that TE is not skeptical enough. It's too naive. It's too trusting. It just accepts all the information that it gets. And then the critique of TI is that they don't achieve success. They're just in their mom's basement. They don't know what to do with their knowledge. They're just lost in the weeds because they're so skeptical that, they never have any success or get their ideas heard. So then there's kind of a difference with how they view authorities. So TE from a young age wanted to be an authority, and they like to synthesize ideas from authorities. A TI follows the guidance of their own inner authority. So this is something like my example, like in the last video. So what I did in that last series was I synthesized ideas from Carl Jung and Vanderhoop and Myers-Briggs, and what are the authoritative people saying on this thing. Introverted thinking is following the guidance of its own inner authority. So even though Carl Jung is one of the most uncontested people within the space, he's not uncontested in general. Still, even if I quote Carl Jung, I will still get comments from people where they'll say, Carl Jung was wrong about X, because Y, they'll leave me 4 paragraphs about why Carl Jung was wrong when he said this one thing. And so it's following the guidance of this inner authority. It doesn't matter how authoritative Carl Jung is seen. He's not above criticism. He's not above reproach to TI. They still are constantly the way I imagine TI is that they're reading sentences and they read a sentence and they go, I agree or disagree. They read a sentence, I agree or disagree. They read a sentence, true, untrue. That's kind of how I imagine it is. It's this big filter, constantly filtering the information. Do they agree? Do they disagree? Does it fit in with the general principles or does it not? So I think that there's a difference between the introverted judging functions, introverted thinking and introverted feeling, are kind of looking at where we lack from the ideal. So introverted feeling has this moral code and it's looking at where are things falling short of that. Introverted thinking is look at these principles and truth and how are things not quite meeting that. extroverted thinking and extroverted feeling are kind of looking at what is there? What can we construct with what is? How can we make use of what is there? So it talked about with extroverted feeling, really admiring the people around them, kind of noticing the positive things, but also some denial about their negative traits. So it's kind of this, what can we use that's good to make harmony? With extroverted thinking, same thing. What information do we have that is good so we can do something with it? We can reach an outcome, we can reach a goal, we can communicate it to people. What's the good information that we can use? And so you can kind of see the push-pull between the introverted and extroverted judging functions. Okay, then we get into the word that they use for extroverted thinking is objective, meaning external. So what can we do externally with this knowledge? Introverted thinking is subjective, meaning internal. What are we going to do internally with this knowledge? So think about it, there was a quote in there. The extroverted thinking will seem kind of banal. It seems kind of commonplace. The quote was, here's a fact, therefore here's a fact. So an example of that might be, I'm like, Carl Jung said X, therefore Carl Jung said X. It's pretty much just, I learned a fact, regurgitate the fact. Maybe I arrange it and I synthesize the information, I organize it in a way that makes sense. So I'm not just regurgitating facts. There is which one will make it most clear to people, how can I arrange it in a way that makes sense. So there is definitely some external organization going on, but it is banal. It's pretty much just like Carl Jung said X, therefore I'm just regurgitating Carl Jung said X. So in that regard, it is objective. Carl Jung objectively said this, it's a fact, you can go find it in his book. It's a fact, it's objective, he said this. Whereas introverted thinking is more subjective. So it reads what Carl Jung said, it's a fact that Carl Jung said this, it might not be right, but it's a fact that he said it. And then they are kind of applying their subjective truth filter or their principled filter, their epistemological filter as you call it, and they're saying, do I think this is right? Is this true or is this false? And so they're applying their subjective filter to it. And it kind of makes it a little bit of an opinion. It's like, my opinion on what he said is that it's wrong. My opinion on what he said is that it's right. So the quote they said for introverted thinking was, I think X, therefore I think X. So sometimes in the comments, I'll get comments like, I think Carl Jung is wrong because I think this is this, because I think this is this, because I think this is this, because I think this is this. So it becomes kind of arbitrary. It's like this introverted thinker thinks Carl Jung was right when he said this. This introverted thinker takes the same sentence and thinks he was wrong. Okay, the last one was an emphasis on speed. So there was quotes about how TE likes to make decisions and likes to make decisions quickly. So that was a direct quote. And there are quotes about thinking and the work goes slow for introverted thinking. And it comes down to there's a lot of exactitude. There were many quotes about scrupulousness and exactitude with introverted thinking and precision, whereas extroverted thinking, it was a quote about, there was a lot more about efficiency and speed, and it's kind of like done is better than perfect. If it's passable, we're going to move on. If it's usable, we're going to move on. Whereas with introverted thinking, it's like, we got to make sure it's right before we move on. Each step of each piece has to be right before we can really move on. But I think that TE and TI have the capacity to have a very synergistic relationship. Like, we need some people to go off in the weeds, and we need people to say, this is not working right now. I think that there's more nuance to this. Maybe there is subtypes. Maybe there's convergence and divergence. We need TI to go off and say, this is where it's not working, and this is where it can be improved, and this is where it's not meeting the standard of truth. And we also need TE to be there and say, this is what is working. There's a lot of stuff that isn't working, there's stuff that isn't precise enough, but we do have Carl Jung's definitions of cognitive function. It's not the fine shades of meaning, but it's the basics, it's the usable information, it's for beginners, it's broadcasting the information out there, it's getting it across in an efficient and a usable way, and saying, you know what, there are shortcomings to this system, but so far, this is what's working. And this is what we can construct based on what is working so far. So I think the introverted function does well at kind of coming first, and the extroverted function, in this case, TE, does good at coming behind and saying, this is what we can do with it then. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know which one of these videos you want to see next. There's going to be 12 videos, because I'll do like TE versus TI, then I'll do TE versus FE, and then I'll do TE versus FI, the one on its axis. So there's going to be 12 of these videos, so let me know which one you want to see next. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.